What's wrong with you people?
Hello and welcome to Not Another Baptist Podcast. I'm Kyle Bierman, and Matt is out this week with some responsibilities at his association. But fear not, you do not have to just listen to me because we have a very special guest on the show this week. I'm joined by my pastor at Highland Baptist Church here in Lubbock, Adam Pardue, the good Reverend Dr. Adam Pardue. Adam, welcome to the show, man. Introduce yourself. Tell our listeners a little bit about who you are, about your family, and then we'll talk about, we're going to talk today about kind of the other side of revitalization and what you've done here at Lubbock and seen the Lord work really over the last 10, 11, 12 years and kind of come through some revitalization and kind of where you go once you're on the quote-unquote other side of that. All right, so tell us about yourself.
Great. Well, thank you for having me, Kyle. We see each other every week.
Yep.
And so to be able to have a conversation, I guess, being recorded that was a lot of fun. I appreciate the invite and appreciate the work that you do. And it's great to be here. When I think about revitalization, I really think about revitalization in kind of my context. And I think my context in so many ways is that of a traditional revitalization that you think of in every sense of the word. I mean, Highland is a great place in the heart of Lubbock. 34th and Quaker, I really still see as, in the middle of the loop, at 34th and Quaker, I see that as kind of the heart of Lubbock, and really you can get anywhere in Lubbock from right here in the heart of Lubbock. And I love this place, and it was a church that was certainly been around for many years. In fact, we celebrated last year 70 years of existence, and it was a church that has had such a great time, such a great ministry in our community, and then it was a church that certainly had some times where it found itself in some difficulties, some aging. And aging in a way that maybe you don't think about, but aging like in buildings and not able to upkeep. Aging in some of the ministries and maybe not having some of the renewal. But look, Highland has always had great people, great ministries, great ministers. And I followed here a long time pastor, Dr. Stan Blevins. Still to this day, a great friend of mine, was a mentor to me. And I think it's a little bit unique in the fact that I actually served here at Highland in 1999 as the youth pastor. I am from Southeast Texas. Now, I'm a West Texas boy now, but I'm from Southeast Texas, so I have to keep some of those roots. Southeast Texas, great Cajun food, the oil refineries, and certainly Hurricane Alley. Went through all of that, but in 99, Angie and I, we came here and even had our first child here, and I served in the youth ministry and then was gone for 10 years. And in about 2011, I started hearing after Dr. Stan had left that they were going to try to go through a revitalization, which I don't guess I really knew what revitalization was that much at that point in time, but it was kind of a reset. And I became the pastor, and we started that process, for the coming years.
So you mentioned the church just celebrated 70 years last year. So you came in following a longtime pastor.
Yes.
How long was Dr. Stan?
25 years.
25 years out of the 60 years at that point that the church had been in existence.
Yes. Now, this is interesting here because I'm only the fifth pastor in the 70 years of existence, and the first pastor lasted 18 months. So you think about that.
Okay.
4 pastors. I'm the fourth pastor since that. I'm the fifth pastor here. And so everybody else over that 70 years, really 68 and a half years, served here in
Wow.
4 pastors.
So you had a history with the church, obviously, having served for a few years as a youth minister. But you come back in 2011? Is that
2012.
Right?
Yeah, beginning of 2012.
Okay. Following a longtime pastor who has a legacy, and yet at the same time, there was some revitalization work to be done. And as you mentioned, this is 2012. So this is before sort of revitalization became the hot topic
vogue,
that it
yeah.
has been over the last 10 years. You consider all the books that have been written in the last 10 years, those weren't available in 2012.
Right.
So you come in, how did you navigate following a legacy pastor, and yet knowing that the church had a lot of work to do to regain some health and some strength? How did you step in as a young guy, mid-30s at the time? What was your thought process coming in and as you approach that?
Well, you can kind of redirect me if I get too far off, because I could talk forever about this. But I think there were a few big, really big flags for me in kind of the go area, really. So the first thing is everything about the church and what they were going through was difficult. And some of that was even being paraded around that they were brave, but inside the church, trying to do that revitalization and try to think about how they were going to staff that and what ministries were going to. A lot of that was difficult, and in so many ways, when I was interviewing, in so many ways it was like, do everything but come here, right? And yet I just felt drawn. So the first thing was I just absolutely, number one, I felt called of the Lord to be back here. I remember when we left Lubbock the first time, Angie and I didn't believe that we would come back here. And in talking to Angie about the situation, we felt called to be back here. So that was number one. Number two, we really loved the people. And the remnant of the folks who were left were people that we loved, people that we had done ministry with already. And at that time, the church was running about 85% over 65. Now, you think about that. I mean, the numbers. So if they were running, 140 people, 100 of those were over 65. And I would say this to every person who is considering revitalization. It's very important for you to consider that you're doing revitalization not in spite of a senior adult crowd, but with them, with that blessing. You're making that relationship so that they're part of the vision, they're part of the ride. I think in so many ways, when we talk about revitalization, we almost look at it negatively and saying we've got to do this because that church has gotten old and they're not going to be able. No, we do that in partnership in so many ways with those senior adults who I just loved dearly and greatly. And then, well, I think the other major factor for me is I felt it was encouraging. I thought it was an opportunity to follow somebody who I truly loved in Stan Blevins. I think that he is a man of the Lord. He had a long preaching ministry, and we're certainly different. I mean, but we also have some things that are similar, and I just thought that, well, being called and doing that, I just thought that was super important.
And if you're listening to this, let me tell you what I've seen Adam do well. We've been members here right at 2 years. But we have a whole lot of family and extended family who's been here. So we've got to kind of watch Highland from afar. One of the things that you've really done well is honored the legacy of Stan. And I know there were some changes that you had to make. And I'm sure there were some folks who came in and when you came in were wanting changes to happen more quickly.
Yeah.
And, we need to stop doing this thing that's been done forever. But if you are in a church and you are following a longtime pastor, I'll say I don't think you ever lose ground or lose credibility by honoring them.
Yeah.
That's not to say that there probably weren't some mistakes made in a longtime pastor. Things that should have been done differently. But man, when you honor your predecessor, that goes a long way. And when you, not only you refuse to speak ill of them, but I think when you don't allow others to speak ill of them, that goes a long way as well.
I just think it sets a bad tone when you spend any of your time downing historical things. Even if I want to stand in the pulpit and talk bad about the stained glass, for what? I'm wasting time there, or to speak bad of a past ministry. I mean, that's a waste of time. And I really think that, again, it's important for us as Baptists, and it's important for us as Highland to be known for what we're for, not always for what we're against. Yeah. And by the way, I'm not against our seniors, our pastor, our former pastor, the former ministries. I'm just for Highland, and for what God's doing here and the work that's being done.
Yeah. So as you look back, what would you say were maybe the one or two big things that you did that set the church up for what has become the last 10, 11 years of growth and health?
So I think the first thing is stability. I think in so many ways when we look at revitalization, you want to have this idea of it's going down, and so now we're going to go up, next week, and we're gonna change music, we're gonna change lights, and everything's gonna be okay. And I don't think it works like that. So when I came in, I wanted to bring some level of stability and re-earn some credibility. I mean, there is some credibility coming in that I was already a minister here, but then I also had to earn some credibility because I was the former student minister, and that was 10 years ago. And certainly there were some people who had some.
And there's a big difference between being the youth guy and the lead pastor. Yeah.
Yes. Sure. And then, there were, there were 5 staff members that were still here from the time that I was here the first time. I was low man on totem pole then, and now I came in and was supposed to help direct and these staff members, and that was difficult. And we also knew that staffing was going to change, and so so many of our books, and again, I'm not saying I'm necessarily saying these books are wrong, but in my circumstance, I think I needed to be very intentional about the pace that we were making changes, because all of those staff members would turn over or go to another place, and so that certainly took some time. And by the way, I would love this to be recorded. It is. Every single one of those people I loved. Every single one of those people I was friends with when I was the student minister, and I was friends with when I got here. And yet, revitalization asks of you things that you don't really want to do. And I think that's a big part. There are many things that we're going to do in revitalization that are hard, that are difficult, and you're making decisions, and you're spending time with committees. And my first year here, we've laughed about this. I had 42 personnel meetings. First year.
Gosh. So somebody just like broke out into hives listening to that on the show.
Yes. It's not for the weary, right? Revitalization is not for the weary. And yet we went through those times and addressing staff and readdressing staff, and then addressing finances and readdressing finances. So number one, again, I think stability. And then I would always go back to there's a way to bring senior adults along with you. And I'm not doing that to manipulate senior adults. I love senior adults. And so I think pastors who are going to do revitalization, they better love senior adults. And then third, which I think is critical, and I just threw the senior adults in there because it's that important to me. But third, I think trying to communicate the steps. I think revitalization guys need, as best they can, to have some steps in mind. Take quite a bit of time to look ahead, and then how do we get there, and communicate those steps. And frankly, if there's a way to communicate those to your senior adults and let them be part of that process, and then as new people come on, I think that change happens incrementally. But the fourth thing, and I think this is really important, is this is a long haul game, right? This is not a quick fix, and I do think there's too many times where we're trying to do a quick fix on churches, and that doesn't work. Especially in revitalization. And so you've heard this said many times. It takes a certain amount of time for you to communicate the vision, Then it takes a certain amount of time to begin implementing that vision. And usually by the time you even have gotten to the communication point, pastors are leaving. So that's a real problem.
I've talked about this on the podcast before. One of the things that I've seen you do really well is the noon Bible study on Wednesdays that outside of staff is exclusively senior adults. And I think a lot of long-time senior adults, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, some of the ones that have been here for a long time are a part of that. And you take that, it's a time for them to be poured into from you, from the pastor. We come in, we sing some hymns that they're familiar with.
Kyle does a great job of leading those hymns. Thanks, man.
But then you also, I mean, if there's some changes coming up or something weird that's happening, you always go out of your way to communicate that to them. Sometimes before you even communicate it to the larger church body.
Oh, I think a lot of times before I communicate that. Yeah.
Because, I mean, I would say we have a pretty contemporary feel here at the church. Worship is, we have a worship team that sings a lot of contemporary songs. This is not the same church it was 10 years ago in many ways. And a lot of those changes have probably come because senior adults were willing to sacrifice and say, yes, we're willing to make these changes because we understand that this is going to help us reach the younger folks, reach the community. And so you've done a really good job of pouring into them where certainly those who want to be connected are not forgotten. And that's big. And so, Pastor, man, if you're in a church, if you are stepping into a new role, I think what Adam has done here is really a good model, and that is carve out some time to pour into senior adults who are probably sacrificing some comfort as changes happen, even if it's as simple as, I mean, the color of the carpet. I know when you first got here, the sanctuary had like these burnt orange pews and carpet and
peach carpet.
Okay,
and burnt orange pews. Yeah,
oh, mercy.
But it was what they could afford at the time. Yeah. Yes, and
but even when you have things like that need to be changed, there's a lot of emotion that's wrapped up in the feel of that space. And so, you know, if you can just really spend some time, you're going to gain a whole lot of capital. But also, that provides you a really good opportunity to love on some folks for whom change is probably going to be pretty difficult.
I tend to think that, and we're talking about our seniors here, I tend to think that seniors aren't opposed to change. They're opposed to surprise. And so if you can communicate that, and by the way, I say that with this Wednesday crowd, I also do the best that I can with our deacons. I try to, allow our deacons to kind of hear this. And again, at Highland, and I'm saying this for the record, our deacons, they're not a governing body. Right. They're the chief servants. Yet I still want them to hear from me so that when whatever they're hearing outside, they can address that with some kind of confidence. Yeah. And when they address that with some kind of confidence, and then our seniors addressing it with some kind of confidence. And then, so when I get to the church body, probably in any significant decision, we're doing the Family Life Center right now. By the time we brought that to the church body for a vote, 40 to 50% had already heard this. It's already like old news. And when I'm bringing it up in business meeting, the people who have already heard it, they're nodding on, yeah, we know about this. Yes. And so they're already influencing, those people. And again, I say this with our deacons, I say this with our senior adults, and then, churches have influencers. And I think the more prep work you can do in some of these big changes, especially in revitalization, the better off you're going to be.
So I think what we have here at Highland is really sort of the epitome of that saying that a lot of guys overestimate what they can do in a year and underestimate what they can do in 10.
Oh, and we could take... That's good. Did you write that?
No.
That's good. I like it.
But, I mean, there's so many things we could talk about because you've done a complete building remodel. You mentioned the Family Life Center, which was kind of already on the books to do. And then on Christmas Eve, we had a fire sprinkler main line bust. And so that got pushed up a little bit, I think, from what we were originally talking about. But if you could look back as we talked about some of the things you did well, do you look back and see anything, maybe one or two big things that you said, I don't think I would do that the same way?
Oh,
I know. Just pick one or two.
Yeah, that's a great thought there. This is a big one. This should make you laugh. But in 2013, the end of 2013, my dear friend Alan Frugier, who was the music minister, has gone on. Maybe 2000, yeah, I think the end of 2013. And so I want to try to make the shift from a more traditional service to see what we can't do to maybe make it a little bit more blended. And again, my reasoning behind that always is I want our senior adults, and this is how we communicate it with our senior adults, I want our senior adults to be able to worship with their grandkids. Yeah. And so if you're going to want to worship with your grandkids, that means there are going to be some sacrifices made. So we started to decide we're going to try to make a little bit of the shift away from the more traditional. Oh, goodness gracious. I'm going to leave out the name because he's a dear friend of mine. He'll probably listen to this. But I couldn't wait to have one of my close friends come in and do worship. And what I was going to do over this time period, over a time period of about 3 months, is I was going to do a more contemporary service. Then the next week I would do a more traditional service. Then the next week I'd do more contemporary. And what I had in my mind, again, I'm a music guy. You're a music guy. What I had in my mind is I only wanted to show the congregation quality, not style, right? So I thought if we could do quality, mix, and it would kind of win out over traditional. And we gave them quality, no question about that. But the problem is too many of those changes too quickly, specifically on the music. And so I remember the first Sunday we were going to do the quality contemporary music. And it was quality, but it was loud. I think we danced a little bit. I think it was the first time anyone had ever been on stage in blue jeans.
Okay.
The lights were dimmed. And we stood for 45 minutes. I mean, that is the trifecta for sure. And I never considered those things at that time. And again, it was quality, but there were too many quality changes for that. And I can remember the very next day on a Monday Bible study, one of my little ladies comes up to me, and I was ready. She says, Mr. Pardue. I was like, oh, I know I'm in trouble now. Mr. Pardue. She said, what was that yesterday? And I said, we're still making some adjustments. Because I was ready. I was like, stay with us as we make some adjustments. She says, that didn't need any adjustments. That needs complete and total change. That should be garbaged. We stood for 45 minutes and I felt the presence of Satan in my legs. That's a true story. And it was from one of our dearest ladies who I had such a close relationship with. And I remember going home that Monday afternoon just defeated. I thought, later on we had a chance to talk about it again, but that was difficult. Yeah. That was really, really difficult. And of course, anytime you have changes from staffing and friends, and through the years, I pride myself on having relationships with staff, and through the years, those kind of things are the most difficult. Yeah. And sometimes when we, like any church, we didn't have a lot, but we had a few dear people that I thought dear people who just were not ready for the kind of changes we were making, and didn't necessarily buy into the new vision of, and even early on we started with that vision of helping people connect, grow, and go.
And so again, if you're listening to this, and if you're a year or two into revitalization, I think you've heard some key things. That is, don't be afraid to go slow. But at the same time, even with that, don't be afraid to continue making changes. I think sometimes we can almost stop moving forward with changes that need to happen out of saying, well, I'm just going to move really slow on this thing. You can move slow, but I think the important thing is that you are moving. You're not just remaining stagnant. But then also listen to the encouragement here after 10 years and seeing a building that's been revitalized in a lot of ways. Major, upgrades.
Renovated.
Yeah, renovate. That's the word I was trying. That wouldn't come to me. I mean, you're talking air conditioning, right? The big things that have all had to be done.
Oh yeah.
But then also people's hearts that have been warmed back to the gospel, and a church now that is multi-generational,
for sure,
is becoming multi-ethnic, and so you are 11 years into this thing here now, and you're beginning to use that revitalization word again. So talk to us, as we begin to wrap up here, talk to us about why that word's making its way back into your vocabulary with Highland Baptist Church.
So I think that this is an important conversation, especially for those who have gone into the revitalization process, and maybe you have a couple of big wins, and then all of a sudden you start to see it go down. And every pastor who is listening to this has probably seen the idea of the arch of growth and the destabilization and the going down. And the hardest thing about the initial revitalization is that when you're dying, it's really hard to turn the ship.
Yeah.
Maybe dying that's a difficult word, but when you're struggling and you're going down. So there's been a lot of things being written now about how do you maintain? So I am a believer. I'm going to go on record as saying this. I'm a believer that once you get into the revitalization culture, you're always going to be in some type of revitalization culture. And frankly, we don't name it because it's, revitalization seems like it's a negative thing, but every church goes through some type of, we need to make changes here. And so Highland, after 10 years, we certainly had seen some significant things. We've seen over 100 people baptized. We've seen hundreds of people join the church. We've seen programs change in effectiveness and be effective. And yet there is that desire to say, hey, we didn't reach the top of the hill just to go back down. We want to continue on that upward trajectory. And so that means we have to make some more changes. And change, I believe wholeheartedly, is easier when things are going well than they are when you're trying to completely turn the ship. Now, by the way, easier, there are some conversations we've had to have, right?
Yeah.
Like, Pastor, things are going so well. We're making the budget. The numbers are up. We're baptizing people. Why do we need to make changes? And yet, there's no question in my mind, if we make no changes from this point out, in another 10 years, we might be facing the same kind of downturn. And so I think it's important to repolish, refresh the vision. And you've heard this going on in our church. We're still talking about the same, gospel-centered, Great Commission, Great Commandment vision, helping people connect, grow, and go. But we're trying to freshen that up a little bit. Yeah. We're trying to encourage people to share the gospel even more. We're honing in on new ministries, and again, kind of trying to put everything on the, if it needs to change, we'll allow it to change.
Yeah, I think one of the things you touched on. So, man, if you ever get to a point in your church where you say we don't have any more changes to make, mm-hmm. you're making a declaration that you've arrived at some sort of perfection that doesn't exist. And I think that's dangerous, because, as you said, if you hit that point, you're like, man, everything's great, we're just going to coast here, you're going to find yourself on the downhill side of that. And so I think constantly asking the questions, what needs to be tweaked, what adjustments need to be made, that's an ongoing work of revitalization. Hopefully not quite as drastic as what you may have to deal with in the first 5 years, but constantly adjusting to make sure that you're in line with God's vision for your community, and things that you are doing are effectively reaching your community as well.
And status quo isn't what we're shooting for, right? God is an amazing, fresh, wonderful creator. And, we've said this in meetings we've been a part of. Friends of ours are using this, but status quo is this mess that we've made, or the mess that we're in, we don't want to be status quo. We want to continue to pursue pursue excellence. That's what happens everywhere else. And how much greater is excellence in the name of the Lord? And it's not about us saying we did it. It's about saying we surrender to the Lord, and He allows us to be in partnership.
Yeah. That's awesome. Adam, thanks for being on the show today. Hey, thank you for listening. I hope this was an encouragement, especially if you are struggling in those hard days of revitalization and going, man, is this ever going to get better? I hope you hear somebody who's on the other side of that, kind of looking back and saying, yes, there are really good days ahead.
You can do it, yeah.
But it requires perseverance and loving on your people, even when they're not easy to love all the time. But hey, thank you for listening. As always, we're so grateful for it. And until next time, may your coffee be as black as night and as bold as the gospel you declare.
What's wrong with you people?